It's interesting though that Besant and others they keep discussing all these wars. So, well, Besant was quite explicit. He said that all these wars more or less had an economic function behind them. That is, we're going to have Venezuela trading in dollars soon. The Russians will be trading in dollars. This was kind of how victory was defined. So obviously, the wars which are making the economic situation much worse are also seen as a way out. If we win, then we can get all our hands on the Iranian oil. Then we can get the Russians to trade in dollars because they're almost done selling their energy in dollars now. So it's not great when you see the great powers thinking in these complete zero-sum terms where it's all or nothing.
Well,
But
it's a little late now to stop de-dollarization, don't you think? I mean, I don't see how you stop it. I don't see how you rescue the petrodollar from extinction. I mean, what's going to happen in the region if the Iranians carry through on what they're saying? They've made it very clear that if they're colliding with us once again, that they'll destroy all of the oil infrastructure, desalination plants on the west side of the Persian Gulf. That's it. It's over. Saudi Arabia can't withstand that. We don't know what the Houthis will do, but there's no reason to believe that they won't intervene and do serious damage to Saudi Arabia. The pipeline that runs from the east to the west across the country, that's very easily disrupted. So, I don't see any good news. I don't know why someone like that, well, I do know why people say those things in Washington, but they're in for an ugly surprise. The world has had it with us. They're not interested in playing with us anymore. They want an end to our interference, our bullying, our financial domination. Now the Iranians have said they have to have all of their money. The Russians would still like to have their money. You can't steal from people and then expect them to cooperate with you. But there is this sort of delusion, that we are untouchable, and we're not untouchable.
well, certainly Iran and Yemen are communicating this quite clearly, though, that they're going on the offensive more or less. That is, you see it in the rhetoric, in their actions, and a lot of this is reflected in what you say. That is, diplomacy. Well, it's seen as just being a sham, a deceptive maneuver to do another surprise attack. But I was wondering, do you see the same development though in Russia that they're also moving towards this idea that there is no point more for diplomacy because in the past it looks like more hawkish voices like Foreign Minister Lavrov was a bit constrained by Putin. Now, the leash is off. He becomes more and more critical of the United States. And from what I've heard, they were supposed to avoid criticism of the United States. That's what they were told. This doesn't seem to apply anymore. And again, when Putin makes these comments that, well, we will start to reciprocate and take European ships, and his trip to the southern Kuril Islands was, well, to use your language before, big screw you to Japan for getting also involved in this war in Ukraine. So do you see essentially the Russians also going on the offensive here that, well, they had enough?
I think the answer is yes. Lavrov is an interesting man. I had the opportunity to meet him once. He is someone who probably knows more about the United States and its people than anybody else in the Russian government. And he has had it. There's no question about it. He's felt that way for a long time. I think people are reaching the conclusion that only by striking back at us on various levels are we going to pay any attention to anything they say or do. And I think that's true, unfortunately. And if you look at our position militarily in the Persian Gulf right now, the problems that we've seen reported from the fleet, this USS Abraham Lincoln, and I don't know how much of that is true or not, but I do know that it's like hell on earth if you are stuck for 300 days practically at sea. I mean, I can't conceive anything worse than that. I've listened to people in the other service say, well, how could they complain about it? They don't understand. There's a big difference between, well, I'm here in this dump that they call Afghanistan or Iraq for another 6 months. And that's one set of problems, but there are ways that you can deal with it. Your mental health can adjust. But if you're out there day after day, month after month, and the only thing that breaks the monotony are the aircraft that periodically take off and deliver munitions somewhere. Otherwise, you're stuck. I think people are tired of it. We don't have the size of the force that we once had. And we also know that the U.S. Navy is sitting several hundred miles south in most cases. In other words, 150 to 200, 300 miles, depending upon where they are, to avoid uh, Iranian missile capabilities, let alone unmanned systems. So it's not unreasonable for people at sea to get sick of this and disgusted. I'm sure lots of people are saying, "What are we doing?" And somebody says, "Well, we're here to run a blockade." Okay, now what? How long do you do this? Do we have enough ships? The answer is usually no. For a blockade that runs as long and as deep as we're trying to maintain, develops at least 100 ships. Then I think I talked earlier in a previous episode about the 200 plus ships that were involved in the blockade against Cuba back in 1962, 63, in that time frame. And then we also had ships in the North Atlantic. They were there to essentially deal with the Soviets if they tried to violate the blockade. So we don't have that right now. And in fact, many of those ships, frequently are viewed as potential disasters waiting to happen. In many of your war games, you look at a carrier. If you lose a carrier, in other words, the carrier is damaged and put out of action, that becomes a catalyst for war on the grand scale. It's one thing to shoot down a few aircraft. It's another to shoot or sink or damage a small naval combatant. But when you start attacking aircraft carriers and inflict real damage, the question you have to ask yourselves is, do we want to put this at risk? Is it worth the risk? Now we have the F-35, the most expensive aircraft in history, the plane that ate the Pentagon, as we refer to it in Washington. That thing, you lose how many of those? What do you get back in terms of your ROI, your return on investment? There are a lot of problems with everything that we're doing. I'm sure that the admirals and the generals are aware, and I'm sure these questions come up. And again and again, I've heard people say, we're not fighting the Imperial Japanese Navy. We lost a lot of ships. We lost thousands of sailors because we were fighting the Navy. We had to drive the Imperial Japanese Navy out. We had to seize control of Straits. We're not doing it. So what are we doing? I mean, these come up, and the answers they're getting from the White House and the administration are not very satisfactory.
Well, how do you see the just so my last question was about the how this all might end up at the end here because well, especially in Russia, let's say you have there's no peace agreement at all. How would that peace look like for Russia? What would a victory entail? Because one gets the impression now from rhetoric that the war objectives are expanding. And indeed, it's not just opportunism as their position is strengthening, but if there is no diplomatic agreement to put an end to the war, then territorial acquisition is a good replacement. But also, just making a larger question, if same with the Iranians, you mentioned now the aircraft carriers. If the Iranians now really go on the offensive and they begin to target the aircraft carriers, how would the United States react? Because again, this is not a good end to the war. It's not as if an aircraft carrier will sink and the U.S. goes home. This is how do you think the U.S. would respond?
Well, let's take one at a time. Let's go back to the Russian dilemma. If you go back to 2022 in April, when there was an agreement hammered out between the Ukrainian and Russian representatives, and subsequently they killed some of the Ukrainians who were involved with that. I mean, the Ukrainian secret police for Zelensky. Then you had brother Boris Yeltsin fly in with a message from Biden. Oh, no, 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 no. Stay the course. You have everything with you. You're going to win. We go back to that. What were the Russians willing to accept? Well, they were willing to accept a neutral Ukraine. They were even going to leave Donetsk and Luhansk and other Russian inhabited areas in Ukrainian hands, provided the Russians were treated equally before the law and were treated as human beings. That's gone. That opportunity has vanished. So what are the Russians going to demand? I think they want this regime and all its adherents, all its proponents eliminated. Too many atrocities have been committed against Russian citizens and Russian soldiers. Things that we blamed on the Russians were done by Ukrainians. I mean, we can watch the satellite footage of bulldozers that have dug giant holes, almost looks like a small quarry, and then thousands of Ukrainian dead are bulldozed into the hole. Then it's all covered up because the Ukrainian government doesn't want people to know the level of losses. And right now, the only thing that we can depend upon as an indicator comes with the exchange of bodies, where a certain number of dead soldiers that are Ukrainians are exchanged for a certain number of Russians. And on average, if you get 20 Russian bodies, the Russians are providing 60 to 70 dead Ukrainians to get the 20 dead Russians. I mean, so the numbers of losses about which we in the West have continually lied is huge. It's beyond our imagination. There's too much blood that has been lost in this war on all sides, but particularly from the Russian standpoint. We have betrayed the Russians, we in Washington, too many times when there was no reason to do so. We have no vital strategic interest in Ukraine. None. We have never had any. We certainly wish the people well and are willing to do business with them, but whether they were neutral or they were part of the Soviet Union or whatever is irrelevant to us. We were not interested, certainly not a place that would justify American blood and treasure under any circumstance. We tended to draw that line on the Polish border, and I think that's where it still is. So